perfect RIA, in case you didn't know. Bringing you all the strategies to help your business grow. Are you happy? Are you satisfied? Are you hanging on the edge of your seat? Sit back and listen in while you feel the beat, yeah. Another myth bites the dust.
Hello, TPR Nation. This is Amber Kuhn from the Perfect RIA. Welcome to another episode of Follow Up Friday, where we cover the highlights and action items from this week's episode. On today's episode, I'm recapping and sharing the action items from all our episodes this week. On Monday, Matt and Micah were joined by the Perfect RIA partner and Chief Technology Officer, Orion Matthews. Their discussion on Monday was essentially how to make sure your office doesn't burn to the ground when you're gone. The guys shared that this is a leadership concern and conversation, which isn't just specific to an RIA. So it's great to have Orion on the podcast to share his experience running other companies. Orion has always been on the technology side and has a lot of experience leading teams and has been running a distributed team for quite some time now. What was amazing is that Orion went a year without a cell phone. His team couldn't call him. Orion said you need to think about management and what that really means. He focuses on guidelines and core values with his team. He really recommends empowering your team. Micah added that it's important to think about those core values and your lens on this. When applying this to an RIA, he mentioned that your team looks at things differently and you need to embrace this. So when you're planning on leaving the office, Matt added that you need to lay out what success looks like while you're gone. Orion loves a quote from Arnold Schwarzenegger, which wasn't, "I'll be back," but instead it was, "never have a net," which basically is to not have a fallback plan, that you need to go all in. Micah said, don't be surprised if the universe will test you on this theory. You'll plan everything out and then you'll have a curveball. You think it's streamlined, fear setting has happened, and then you've got it in place and then it goes awry. Matt said you need to figure out what things can be allowed to break and to let your team make mistakes. Orion said this is similar to having kids and judging risk. The guys also talked about how do you show staff appreciation. Matt will take the time to ask the team, what can I do to make your life better? And Micah added that it's important for the team to focus on their career paths, in that this includes having a personal development budget, and that you need to invest in your team for them to become better. Think about how you're setting them up to get the skills they need to do a good job. Going back to being out of the office for an extended period of time, Matt said to make sure you're fear setting with the team and make sure there is a safety valve available of who to call if there is a final decision that needs to be made. The guys wrapped up the episode and moving forward with getting out of the office by discussing that this can all happen when you fully trust your team, but you need to help build that trust by creating a system of success for your team and to work with them to fix a process when something goes wrong. By doing that, you're giving your team a voice and permission to speak up and to jump in head first. You have to unplug to figure out what works. Let's get into action items from Monday's episode. Book on your calendar time for you to walk away without technology and where your team can't reach you. When are you going to 100% unplug during the work week? And start with delegation. The guys recommended reading the book, The Checklist Manifesto. Also, join Matt and Micah in person at XYPN Live. If you love listening to them on the podcast, then you do not want to miss the chance to see them in person on October 8th in Denver. Visit theperfectria.com to get signed up. And for our Invictus members, be sure to sign up for our next mastermind on December 1st and 2nd. Also, for our members, we have a webinar coming up on September 21st with Colleen and Victoria from Matt and Micah's offices, and we strongly recommend that your team members attend. Moving into our What Works Wednesday episode, Matt was joined by Brendan Fraser from Wired Planning and the Human Side of Money podcast, where they spent this time talking about the importance of communication with your clients. Brendan said you need to focus on the human side of money and the human side of advice, that it's not just about changing behavior and building trust, but also looking at how everything you do ties together, and that this is essentially the psychology of financial planning. Matt said these are essential discussions to be having, and Brendan added that a lot of advisors who have the best relationships, it's because they figured out and mastered the human side, even if they didn't set out to do this. He said sometimes this happens on accident, but to think about what if you were intentional about this? When asked about how to improve in this area, Brendan said really where to gauge this is with tracking and monitoring and looking at what percentage of time you are talking versus a client talking, as well as tracking the implementation of the advice that you share with your clients. Matt shared that if your clients aren't implementing your advice, then you really need to look at why they aren't. Maybe you didn't give a compelling reason with your advice, or you just didn't communicate this effectively. Brendan shared a thought he received from Tim Maurer, which was looking at an advisor driven recommendation or client inspired recommendation. The idea is that you're cultivating the conviction that it's the right thing to do in your client's mind instead of telling them what to do. Brendan said a lot of people want to know how to make these communication changes today, but this is something that takes practice. He recommends starting by learning more about it and looking at the people who were doing well in this. He recommends reading, but stress that you also have to practice this. You can't become a great listener and communicator overnight. And Matt added that you have to recognize that this is a complex skill. You have to make this a priority. So, action items from Wednesday were to figure out how much time you're talking versus the other person. And check out the Human Side of Money podcast. Also, if you use an implementation step or action item, add a column for why or the purpose of why you're doing something. And send a recap email to your client. This would be a recap of what you heard and understood and the meaning, including what is the most important thing for the client. You want to make them feel that they're heard and understood. Moving into Thursday's Worlds to Conquer episode, Jamie discussed hiring for your team, which can be a difficult action. Jamie discussed how the hiring process works in the Shalansky office and shared her tips and recommendations on not only attracting candidates but also offering them the position. Jamie recommends making your job posting a little different from most and including instructions that require the candidate to take action and make sure they've actually read the posting. This will then make it easier to sort through candidates. Look for their resume and their experience when they apply, but Jamie notes that in their office, that doesn't mean that someone needs to come from a financial background. She really likes looking at those in the medical field. She offered recommendations on where to post a job, such as on your website, Indeed, ZipRecruiter, LinkedIn, or Facebook. She said you can look at hiring a recruiter as well, but understand there can be a high cost associated with it. Just be sure to use what works in your practice. Jamie also added that she is constantly in a state of recruiting, regardless of whether she has a job opening. Jamie then went through her interview process, which she'll share with the candidate so that they know what to expect. And that includes things such as making sure they know to be on time, which is actually 15 minutes early, doing what you say you're going to do, and being respectful of others. She'll go through the expectations, such as who's hosting the meeting and initiating the call, and she'll recommend that the candidate do research and know who works there. She'll also let them know that they won't be asked typical interview questions. This is more of a conversation, but to be prepared with questions. She said during these interviews, personality and communication are key. You need to like each other. Then, lastly, Jamie went through the phases and stages of the hiring process in the Shalansky office. For phase one, that includes the application, resume, and submission, then an interview with the leads, and then a reference and online check. Phase two is a DISC assessment or a Colby that's really to make sure that the person that Jamie's hiring is the right fit for the role. She'll also do the background check, and this is also the phase where the team interview will take place. And the last phase is the leadership interview, where they'll also go over the income and benefits, then sending the job letter, which includes everything that was talked about verbally. Lastly, once someone is hired, they'll then go through a very thorough onboarding process to set them up for success. That wraps up our recap and action items from this week's episodes. And of course, for our last action item, be sure to give us 5 stars wherever you are listening. Thank you for joining me today, and until next time, happy planning.
Hold on before we go. Something that you need to know. This isn't tax, legal, or investment advice. That isn't our intent. Information designed to change lives. Financial planning can make you thrive. Start today, don't think twice. Be a better husband, father, mother, and wife.